Now, I've already talked about creating dynamic, realistic, and unique protagonists. I also wanted to talk a little bit about creating realistic characters. Because if you have a good protagonist, you need to have some character or characters around them that are realistic and that can interact with them. And ultimately, hopefully, it'll lead to conflict, which is what we're going to build our stories on. So a few things to remember about creating realistic characters. The first thing is you want to avoid cliches. Cliches are just whenever we see characters or we think of particular people or situations that are so obvious and they have been done to death. Examples of cliches might be having a really wicked stepmother in a story. That's something that we can take all the way back to Cinderella and other fairy tales. We want to avoid stuff like that. Cliches also might involve something like the absent-minded professor, one who's really brilliant but can't remember where he parked his car, things like that. We want to avoid those types of cliches, both in how we draw and build our characters and also in the writing. Okay, so you never want to have phrases or sentences like "that's calling the pot the kettle black." Did I say that right? Or "that's at the end of the day," or any of those cliches like that. We want to create dynamic and unique writing. So avoid cliches at all costs. Whenever you're also dealing with realistic characters, a tendency for beginning fiction writers is to want to protect your characters and not show any of their flaws, but this is something that we don't want to do. We want to show the flaws, the weaknesses, their fears, anxieties. We need to show those things in our writing in order to build conflict and build stories around. So don't be afraid to put your characters in uncomfortable situations or unfamiliar situations just because we want to protect them. Good, realistic characters are not all bad and they're not all good. So we need to have those flaws shown. Also, too, when you're thinking about building your characters, as I said before in the protagonist video that I made, you want to know way more about the characters than you actually include in the story. But again, you want to know physically how they look. You want to know things about their personality. You want to know things that they have in their past, their job, educational history. Have they ever been arrested? You want to know those interesting details because you never know when you might want to use them in your stories. But a really big thing with regards to realistic characters is the way that they speak. I'm going to do another short video on dialogue. And dialogue is just speech between characters going back and forth. They have to speak naturally, the way that we actually talk in real life. Otherwise, it's going to take the reader out of the story. They're going to be like, wait a minute, this sounds really fake. A good way to think about this is if you've ever seen a movie where characters are talking back and forth and immediately you're like, this doesn't sound at all like human beings. They wouldn't talk this way. So we want to be cognizant of the way that they talk to other characters. And also, too, even though we need to show their flaws, we need to show their weaknesses, we need to show how they're unique as characters, we still need to be consistent with their characters. We don't want to have them do something that is completely random. So, for instance, if you're writing a story about, let's say, a stuffy English teacher like me, who's really cautious and likes their job and is very careful and doesn't go out a whole lot, doesn't party or anything like that, you wouldn't have 3/4 of the story describing the types of conflicts that would happen within that situation. Then all of a sudden at the end he's randomly going to decide to rob a bank. That's completely out of character, and that's what we mean by remaining consistent. You don't want to have inconsistencies that are just completely out of the blue. Now, a good thing that we can do here to help with trying to create a realistic character is think of a favorite character from a novel that you read or a short story. Read over that novel or that short story, and particularly about that character, and then sort of write down ideas about why you find this character so interesting. What is it about them? Chances are you're going to start to write down things that are interesting because they're not just all good or they're not just all bad. But again, that's something that's going to help you build realistic characters. Thinking about your favorite characters in stories or novels, and start to sort of write down specifically things about them that were interesting. That'll help you build your own characters.